In December 2015, Forbes named Elizabeth Holmes the youngest self-made billionaire in America. She was 31 years old. Her company, Theranos, was valued at $9 billion. She was on the cover of Fortune, Time, and Inc. magazine. The Obamas invited her to state dinners. Her board included Henry Kissinger, George Shultz, and James Mattis. She was going to change healthcare forever with a machine called the Edison that could run hundreds of medical tests from a single drop of blood. Walgreens signed a deal to put Theranos wellness centers in 800 of its stores. The U.S. military explored using the technology on the battlefield. Except the machine never worked. And she knew it. By 2018, Theranos was worthless. By 2022, Holmes was sentenced to 11 years in prison for fraud. Her second-in-command, Sunny Balwani, got nearly 13 years. Investors including Rupert Murdoch, the Walton family, and Betsy DeVos lost a combined $121 million identified by the court. The company had raised over $700 million on a promise that was, according to every medical expert who examined it, biologically impossible. Now, you might look at Theranos and think, okay, that's one bad company. A fraud. A scam. But here's the thing. The exact same pattern is played out again and again over the last decade. Companies worth tens of billions of dollars, built on nothing but a story. And the most remarkable part isn't that these scams existed, it's how long they got away with it, and how often the people responsible suffered almost no consequences at all. Theranos had every safeguard that's supposed to prevent this. A board, packed with former secretaries of state. A world-class law firm. Auditors from one of the Big Four. Regulators at the FDA and CMS reviewing their technology. And none of it stopped a 31-year-old Stanford dropout from convincing some of the most sophisticated investors in the world to give her $700 million for a product that could never work. Because here's the dirty secret of the startup world. When the story is good enough, nobody actually checks. Okay, so to understand how this keeps happening, you have to understand the machine that made it possible, Silicon Valley venture capital in the 2010s. And at the center of that machine, more than any other single force, one man, Masayoshi Son. In 2017, Son launched the SoftBank Vision Fund, the largest pool of private investment capital in history, $100 billion. Most of it from Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund. His thesis was simple. Find founders who could become the next Steve Jobs, give them whatever they asked for, and bet entirely on vision over fundamentals. He called it his $100 billion blank check, and he meant it literally. The problem is, when you hand a blank check to someone who's been told they're a genius their entire adult life, they don't build a sustainable business. They build a monument to their own ego. And the most expensive monument SoftBank built was WeWork. By 2019, WeWork was valued at $47 billion. It was the most valuable startup in America. Its founder, Adam Neumann, had built a company that did one thing. It leased office space, decorated it nicely, and subleased it at a markup. That's it. That's the entire business model. And yet SoftBank invested over $10 billion into this company. At its peak, WeWork was losing $2 billion a year. But Neumann didn't care. He flew on a private Gulfstream he bought for $60 million. He named buildings after himself. He made his wife the co-CEO, despite her having zero business experience. He trademarked the word we. And when the company's IPO prospectus was published in August 2019, the world finally saw what investors had been looking at for years. A company that had never made a profit, never come close to making a profit, and was burning cash so fast that it would run out of money within 12 months. The IPO was canceled, the CEO was ousted, SoftBank wrote down billions, and in November 2023, WeWork filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Its stock fell to 84 cents a share, The company that was once worth $47 billion was now worth $44 million. SoftBank's total losses on WeWork reached $14.4 billion. To put that number in perspective, $14.4 billion is more than the entire GDP of several small countries. It's enough to buy 40,000 Lamborghinis. It's more than the combined lifetime revenue of every WeWork location that ever opened. And SoftBank, one of the most sophisticated investment firms in the world, lost it all on a real estate company whose main innovation was putting nice furniture in rented offices. And Adam Neumann? He walked away with hundreds of millions of dollars in cash, stock, and refinance loans, a golden parachute built on top of a failed promise. Today, he's back with a new company called Flow, a housing startup. And Andreessen Horowitz, one of the most respected venture capital firms in Silicon Valley, gave him $350 million to do the exact same thing again. Of course, you might argue that WeWork was just bad business, not outright fraud. And technically, you'd be right. Neumann wasn't convicted of anything. He sold a story, investors bought it, and when the story fell apart, he kept the money. That's the game. But with other companies, the line between bad business and outright fraud disappears completely. Sam Bankman-Fried was the golden boy of crypto. MIT graduate, founder of FTX, a cryptocurrency exchange valued at $32 billion, he testified before the Senate. He donated over $40 million to Democratic politicians, making him the second largest Democratic donor in the country. Celebrities like Tom Brady, Steph Curry, Naomi Osaka, and Larry David promoted his company in Super Bowl commercials. He was on the cover of Forbes, Fortune, and Bloomberg Businessweek. He was described as the next Warren Buffett, a genius who was going to revolutionize finance. And behind the scenes, he was running one of the largest financial frauds in American history. Here's what happened. FTX had a sister company called Alameda Research, a quantitative trading firm also controlled by Bankman-Fried. When customers deposited money into FTX, Bankman-Fried had programmed the system to give Alameda special privileges. It could trade with unlimited leverage. It wasn't subject to the same risk controls as everyone else. And most importantly, it could withdraw customer deposits without triggering any alerts. By November 2022, over $8 billion in customer deposits had been quietly transferred to Alameda. Some of it was used for trading. Some of it funded political donations. Some of it went to buy luxury real estate in the Bahamas, where Bankman-Fried lived in a $40 million penthouse with 8 other FTX executives. All of it was gone. The collapse was triggered by a single article from CoinDesk on November 2, 2022, pointing out that Alameda's balance sheet was mostly made up of FTT tokens, a cryptocurrency that FTX itself had invented and controlled. It was like discovering that a bank's assets were mostly IOUs written by the bank's own owner. Within 7 days, FTX was bankrupt, $32 billion in valuation. Gone. Over a single week, the speed of the collapse was so dramatic that even Bankman-Fried seemed surprised. He later tweeted, "I'm sorry, that's the biggest thing. I fucked up. And I should have done better." In March 2024, Bankman-Fried was sentenced to 25 years in prison and ordered to repay $11 billion. But by then, the damage was permanent. Thousands of customers lost their life savings. The crypto industry, which had spent years trying to gain legitimacy, was set back a decade. And one of the most trusted exchanges in the world turned out to be a house of cards built on stolen money. Now, you might think that after Theranos and WeWork and FTX, investors would have learned their lesson. But they hadn't. And they still haven't. In 2020, Nikola Corporation went public through a SPAC merger at a valuation of $30 billion. Its founder, Trevor Milton, promised to revolutionize the trucking industry with zero-emission hydrogen electric trucks. General Motors invested $2 billion. The company was celebrated as the next Tesla. Milton appeared on every major business network. He was compared to Elon Musk. He bought a $32 million ranch in Utah. There was just one problem. The truck didn't work. In a now famous video that Nikola released to promote its technology, a Nikola 1 truck appeared to be driving at high speed on a highway. What the video didn't show was that the truck had been towed to the top of a hill. It was rolling downhill. There was no hydrogen fuel cell. There was no electric motor. The truck wasn't powered by anything. Milton had simply parked it at the top of a hill, turned on the camera, and let it coast. In October 2022, Milton was convicted of 1 count of securities fraud and 2 counts of wire fraud. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison. He was ordered to pay $168 million in restitution and a $1 million fine. But here's where the story takes an interesting turn. In March 2025, President Trump pardoned Trevor Milton. Not a commuted sentence, a full, unconditional pardon. Milton walked out of prison and immediately became CEO of Cyberjet Aircraft, another company. His conviction was erased. His $168 million restitution order became unenforceable. The investors who lost money on Nikola got nothing. And the message to every startup founder in America was unmistakable. If you commit fraud on a large enough scale and you know the right people, there are no consequences. Now, this pattern raises an obvious question. How did these companies get away with it for so long? And the answer has 3 parts. First, the auditors. Startups are private companies. They don't have to open their books to the public. The only people who see inside are the investors and the external auditors. And the auditors, it turns out, were spectacularly bad at their jobs. Take Wirecard. Wirecard was a German payment processing company worth $14 billion. It was a member of the DAX 30, Germany's most prestigious stock index. For over a decade, auditors at Ernst & Young signed off on Wirecard's financial statements without question. They didn't notice that $2.1 billion in cash, supposedly held in escrow accounts at banks in the Philippines, did not exist. The accounts didn't exist. The banks said they had never held the money. The Philippine Central Bank issued a statement saying the money was never there, and EY had missed all of it. The CEO, Marcus Braun, was arrested in June 2020. The company filed for insolvency. Shareholders lost everything. And EY, one of the most respected accounting firms in the world, faced years of lawsuits for missing what turned out to be one of the largest accounting frauds in European history. The Wirecard case is particularly revealing because it shows how the system fails not just at the startup level, but at the level of supposedly mature, publicly traded companies. Wirecard was audited by EY for over a decade. EY charged them millions in fees. EY signed off on financial statements that included $2.1 billion that never existed. And when the fraud was exposed, EY's response was essentially, "We relied on information provided by management," which is like a security guard saying, "I relied on the thieves to tell me they weren't stealing anything." Second, the investors. Venture capital firms make money by finding the next unicorn. They are not paid to be skeptical. They're paid to believe. And once they've invested, they have every incentive to keep the story going. Because admitting they backed a fraud means writing down their fund. It means explaining to their own investors that they missed the red flags. It means their reputation takes a hit. So they stay quiet. They double down, and they hope the problem goes away. And third, the media. Every one of these founders was celebrated before they were exposed. Holmes was on magazine covers. Bankman-Fried was described as a genius. Milton was compared to Elon Musk. Neumann was called the next great entrepreneur. The media built these people up because scandal sells, but so do success stories. And covering the rise of a billionaire is much more profitable than asking difficult questions. The point is, in a market built on trust, the incentives are all wrong. The people who should be asking questions are the same people who make money when the answers are positive. So the hype continues, the valuation goes up, more investors pile in. And by the time anyone asks whether the business actually works, the founders have already cashed out. Now, you might think that after all of this, something fundamental would have changed. And to be fair, some things have. The SEC has tightened rules around SPAC mergers. The Department of Justice has shown it's willing to prosecute fraud. Bankman-Fried got 25 years. Holmes got 11. Balwani got 13. But the fundamental machinery hasn't changed. The same venture capital firms are still writing checks. The same media is still building founders up. And the same gap in oversight still exists for private companies. The problem is structural. Venture capital is a hits-based business. A single successful investment in a company like Google or Facebook can return an entire fund. So investors are constantly searching for the next outlier, which means they are trained to ignore red flags in favor of potential upside. When a founder walks into a room and says they're going to change the world, the default response is not skepticism, it's excitement. And that excitement, repeated thousands of times across thousands of pitches, creates an environment where asking basic questions about whether the business actually works feels almost rude. Adam Neumann raised $350 million for Flow. Trevor Milton is running another company. The SPAC market, which collapsed after Nikola, is coming back. And every day, somewhere in Silicon Valley, a founder with a charismatic pitch and an impossible promise is raising millions of dollars from investors who are terrified of missing the next big thing. Maybe that's the real scam. Not Theranos, not WeWork, not FTX, not Nikola, not Wirecard, but the system that keeps funding them, keeps hyping them, and keeps letting the founders walk away wealthy while everyone else pays the price. The names change. Holmes, Neumann, Bankman-Fried, Milton, Braun. But the story stays exactly the same. A charismatic founder, an impossible promise. A media machine that builds them up. Billions of dollars in investment. A spectacular collapse. And a founder who escapes consequences. And the only real question is how many billions more will be lost before something fundamental changes. The irony is that none of this is new. In 2001, Enron collapsed because Arthur Andersen, one of the most trusted audit firms in the world, signed off on $20 billion in hidden debt. Andersen was convicted of obstruction of justice. The firm dissolved. 28,000 employees lost their jobs. And everyone said, never again. But here we are 25 years later, and the pattern is worse than ever. The numbers are bigger, the valuations are more absurd, the founders are more reckless. And the safeguards are just as broken as they were before. The names change. Holmes, Neumann, Bankman-Fried, Milton, Braun. But the story stays exactly the same. A charismatic founder with an impossible promise. A media machine that builds them up as a genius. Billions of dollars from investors who don't ask hard questions. A spectacular collapse. And a founder who escapes with their fortune while everyone else pays the price.